This video was made in association with KnifeInformer.com. Head on over to Knife Informer for all of your blade-related needs, including reviews, comparisons, stats, and more.
What is up, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Collection Commentary. In today's video, we're taking a look at something pretty cool. This is an Herucus Blomerus. I've been told how to pronounce his last name, and I don't remember. But this is an Herucus LL07. That's the model of the knife, and Herucus is a custom knife maker from South Africa, if you guys are unfamiliar. He's got some similarities to Thorburn, though his designs and his quality is a little bit more tempered compared to Andre. And we'll kind of talk about that during this video a little bit. But the first thing that we're going to jump into is a size comparison with the PM2 and RAT2. And then we'll take a look at the weight, the overall weight of the knife, so you guys can get an idea of what we're working with here. Now, I did meet Herucus at Blade Show, and that was an absolute pleasure. If you guys haven't seen the video from Blade Show about his booth, go ahead and check that out as well. All right, and now that we have the size comparison lined up, you can see here that the knife is a little bit bigger than the RAT2, but is somewhat dwarfed by the PM2. It's going to be a pretty reasonable EDC shape. I do like that the handle is only ever so slightly larger or longer than the RAT2, but the proportions that you get in terms of cutting edge and blade length are significant in comparison to the RAT2. So overall, again, something that I really enjoy is when the most amount of blade is crammed into the least amount of handle possible. Something that I always appreciate a lot, and Herucus has obviously done a very good job of that here. So it's definitely a decent EDC size. It is going to be slightly on the smaller end, which I know that a lot of people are starting to appreciate more and more. Especially in the US, so it's got a really great size to it. Next, let's check out the weight. Now, this being a handmade custom with no internal milling, I do expect it to be a little bit higher on the weight side, even for its size. So you can see we have 4.06 ounces. That's a pretty reasonable weight for an 8 to an 8.5 inch overall length knife. This one's a little bit smaller, and so that's definitely a little bit on the weighty side. You do have, of course, again, non-hollowed out titanium liners. You do have zirconium bolsters, and then you actually have an N690 steel backspacer. And so that's going to increase the weight of the knife as well. Typically, when you look at something like a Thorburn, you end up getting a G10 backspacer, and that helps reduce the weight overall. Whereas Herucus opts for the stainless steel backspacer. On this particular knife, I do believe I've seen a few G10 backspacers from him. And it's similar with this Francois Masson N690 steel backspacer as well. So definitely going to increase the weight a little bit there, but still, at 4 ounces, it's pretty reasonable overall weight, especially if you're looking at a dressier handmade folder like this. It seems to be pretty well expected. So let's go ahead and jump into the features and flaws on this knife. The first thing I want to talk about is that Herucus's fit and finish kind of lacks when compared to a king like Thorburn. The quality is clearly there, but there's definitely some issues. For example, there's space between the lockside bolster and the lockside scale. I'll see if I can show that off. So you can see it's flush here, but there's a little bit of a gap here. If you do like hold it up to a computer monitor or something like that, you can see the light shine through, but we're talking about way like less than half of a millimeter. So again, it's so minimal that with a handmade custom, it's the kind of thing that I think a normal person would kind of let slide. But if you are considering quality and you are considering that there are other South African handmade options at similar price points, maybe something to think about, that that the fit and finish isn't exactly perfect the way you might expect on something like a Thorburn. And you know, that's just kind of the nature of handmade customs, and it's something that you're either going to have to live with or simply choose not to purchase a knife from such a maker. He also let the anodization slip. There's an anodization error in the liners here. I'll see if I can show that off. I'm going to stand up and see. So it's right here. And you can just see that it basically looks like when he anodized it, there was a little bit of gunk left over or something like that that he hadn't wiped off. And so when he wiped it off, there was no anodization in those spots, and that's kind of a bummer. I mean, that seems like a pretty easy one to get right. If you take a look at the knife and you have this error, it seems like something you might want to go back to the anodization section of your shop and try that again. So that was definitely a little bit of a disappointment to me to have those factory errors. But again, dealing with handmade knives, the question is, what can you expect? And if it wasn't for makers like Thorburn, I'd probably be more inclined to let it slide. I'd be making excuses for the knife and saying, oh, it's handmade. Oh, he's rushed. He's trying to get the knives out in time for Blade Show or whatever. I might normally make those excuses, and then somebody like Thorburn shows up with a knife that they also brought to Blade Show that has no voids and absolutely no spaces between anything, and is essentially, from a build perspective, a perfect knife. This was a couple $100 more than this, so it's kind of like, you're also getting a higher end material on this knife and much more detailed bolsters. So it's like, does that price difference really reflect in terms of build, or is it just because you're getting a little bit more handwork, a little bit more time in terms of the art aspect of the Thorburn? So that's definitely something to consider. I got to handle a lot of Herucus's knives at Blade Show, and they are very high quality, and I really don't want to speak too poorly about him, because I don't want to make it sound like, compared to other custom knives, his is a bad choice, because that's frankly not true. This is an excellent knife. I have another LL07 being made for me right now, and that should be coming sometime in the fall, and I very much look forward to that knife, and I have no problem paying for it. So, it's not the worst thing, but it is something to consider. If you're only looking to buy maybe one South African handmade knife, there's really only one direction to go, and it's sitting off to the side here. Having said all that, I do want to talk about the things that are great about this knife, and I want to get you guys, again, excited for Herucus as a maker, because he's a very nice guy. I appreciate the work that he does, and I think that I might have just, not gotten the best example. Let's talk about the action. The action's good. It's even really good, but it's not quite excellent in the same way. Again, I always have to go back to the Thorburn, in the same way that a Thorburn is. So deployment is snappy and enjoyable. I really do like deployment on this knife. It's got a good sound to it. It's pretty consistent. I don't have to really put that much effort into the flipper tab. I do feel like the detent is doing most of the work for me, which is how I want to feel on a knife. If you have to wrist flick a knife or something like that, then the detent's not doing its job. And the detent is very much doing its job on this knife. I do not have to put too much effort into the flipper tab. If I fat finger light switch it, I don't always get deployment if I'm holding the knife. Well, actually, it's performing quite well on camera for you right now. But so you can see the deployment is really excellent. It's definitely snappy, and it's definitely enjoyable. Now, I will say that I did have to reduce a little bit of the pivot tightness and Loctite it into a slightly off-center position to get it quite as smooth and as droppy as you can see here. And, that's something that I've had to do with lots of knives. It's pretty normal. But it does not come quite out of the box as beautifully drop shut as, again, a Thorburn might. Having said that, it's still super smooth. You can see here it does drop shut with a light shake. The blade will move with momentum, so it doesn't have to be shaken every time to get it to move. And with a decent shake, it will fall shut in one fell swoop. So overall, it's got a pretty great action. Again, for a handmade IKBS custom, this is about what I expect. It's kind of unfair to sometimes compare to Thorburn just because he's so far above the rest of the echelon. But this knife does a great job. It's got a really great action, and that's something that I have to appreciate. It has to be said that Herucus could do some more contouring on his edges. Based on what I got to try at Blade Show, this seems to be a design choice that he stands behind, but it's not really my favorite. And what I mean by that is all the liners and the edges and everything are pretty much 90-degree angles. So as you get up and around the bolster here, as you touch the scales, and as you look at the inside of the liners and touch the lock bar and everything, he's done very, very little contouring. Just kind of the bare minimum to make the knife not immediately catch on your hand. And that's something that I'm not a super big fan of. I do wish that he would put a little bit more into contouring the edges. Again, I really think this is a design choice. This seems to appear on all of his knives. Even this Francois Masson knife is very similar in that respect. It's all 90-degree angles. It's just kind of a little bit sharp when you're operating the knife. And that just seems like a way to cut down on time, on production time. These guys are... Herucus is now a full-time knife maker. Francois is a part-time knife maker. But Herucus did start as a part-time maker. He was a collector originally, and... his wife said, why don't you just start making them? And he was kind of like, okay. He did learn a lot from Andre. They are living in the same area in general over in South Africa. But it does seem like something on a lot of these South African knives where, they leave a lot of these edges at 90-degree angles. And I understand that applying contouring to the whole knife and making it look even and getting it to the quality level of, say, a Larevo here would really maybe increase the time and then increase the cost. But honestly, I'd rather pay $900 for something like a Thorburn that is very well contoured and has no sharp edges and just feels really smooth and glossy and great in the hand. I'd rather pay $900 for that than $800 for this. End of story. And that's about all I have to say on that matter. So I would really appreciate it if they would take the time to get a little bit more contouring done on their knives and just charge a little bit more if that's really what it takes to get that. But I do think that that's something that separates the good from the great. Now, just that's pretty much it for the features and flaws on this, right? The clip works great. It's a 3D milled titanium clip with the ceramic ball. That's really my favorite clip that is out in the world right now. They all function absolutely fantastically. I can get all of these knives in and out of my pocket with one hand with no issue at all. And again, being a handmade custom, there isn't too much to talk about there. It has decent ergonomics. It's a pretty straight handled knife. Can't really go wrong with all of that. It does fit very well in the hand and everything like that. You can see the blade shape is perfect. It's just a drop point with a decent belly, decent flat area. It is hollow ground, so it's going to make for an excellent slicer. And this particular one has a really beautiful, simple raindrop pattern Damascus blade. So functionally, pretty decent knife, still a dressy gentleman folder, probably not going to see hard use or anything like that. So I just want to jump into the story time on this one. Again, I do have one of these coming in the fall. I will be selling this knife so that I can pay for the other one. I did work with African Custom Knives to get an order in for a full custom Herucus LL07. So hopefully that all comes through and everything works on that deal and I end up getting that knife. It'll have materials and some design features that are just a little bit more personalized to me. So I'm really excited to share that knife with you guys in the future when I finally get my hands on it. But I do suppose that I've pretty much said everything I wanted to say in the story time throughout the video. I apologize for some of the discourse there and the uncoordination. But, I did meet Herucus at Blade Show. He's a very nice guy. He had a lot of amazing pieces. I was very happy to meet him. I was very supportive of his knives. I kept trying to get people to buy them. I think he does a great job. I feel like this whole video has kind of had a negative vibe, and I've said a lot of negative things, and that's probably just because it's sitting next to this knife, and that's not the most fair thing. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you would like to see pictures of all these beautiful knives, you can do so by following me on Instagram at tovarishworks. If you would like to send me a lovely loaner, I would really appreciate it, and you can do so by emailing me at tovarishworks@gmail.com. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I will see you next time.